Hi folks, welcome to the next episode of Ask the R podcast. Architects love to say, we'll cross that bridge later, until the ecologist says, sorry, you need to redo your site layout and now your whole application is on hold. So in this episode, we're going to cut through the confusion about preliminary ecological appraisals, what they are, when you need one, and why skipping it can cost you much more than just the money. Hi folks, welcome back to the Ask the R podcast, and as I said in the intro today, we're going to be talking about preliminary ecological appraisals. And just this morning I had some information sent through from a chap called Paul, who I'm going to call right after this podcast, and Paul has some ecology surveys that are up to 7 years old, or they are 7 years old, and he picked just one small part out of it, and he came to us and said, I need a bat survey. And I looked at it and I said, well, actually there's a whole load of other stuff you need to do here, and you need to repeat the whole document, because these surveys, they're only really valid for 18 months to possibly 2 years. So number one mistake when it comes to planning applications, skipping the PEA. Sounds like a maybe document, but it's not. It's the foundation of everything that happens on site from a ecological perspective. So what is a preliminary ecological assessment? It's exactly that. What happens first off is that whoever you choose to produce this document for you, the very first thing that they'll do is they'll do a desktop study on the site. And the desktop study, the whole point of the desktop study is to essentially give the ecologist who then goes out to site to do the site works an idea of what sits within the local area. The information that they get in the desk study, it comes from several areas. It comes from publicly available open source information like NBN Atlas and DEFRA's Magic Maps, and Scotland and Wales have different resources as well. And it also comes from something called Local Ecological Record Centre data, or LERC data. These are records that the Local Ecology Record Centre holds of protected or notable species and habitats within the local area. And that information is often not publicly available. It's provided to them by volunteers, other ecological consultancies, and it really does form the bedrock of further survey effort. We're not going to know that the next door neighbour to the property had bats unless we do those searches. Those searches are usually charged onto the customer as a disbursement. The ecological consultancy won't make any money on that. It's just a fee that's paid to the local ecological record centre, and they provide the information to the ecologist, and quite often they're confidential because there'll be information on there about protected species. So once the desktop study is completed, what happens then? Well, then there's a site walkover survey. So the ecologist, or two ecologists, depending on the size of the site, they'll come out to the site and they'll do lots of things, but it's done at a very, very high level at this stage. So if you've got buildings that are being altered or interacted with, then they might carry out a preliminary bat roost assessment. They'll carry out a preliminary nesting bird assessment as well, so they'll be looking for evidence of nesting birds in any trees or hedges that are proposed for removal, any buildings, outhouses, anything like that as well. If there are any water bodies within 250 metres of the site, they may well carry out something called a habitat suitability assessment on those to see whether they've got the potential to support notable and protected species like great crested newts. They'll do a walkover survey of the whole site, and they'll be looking for evidence of badgers and deer and reptiles and all sorts of stuff, and all of this information will feed into the final preliminary ecological assessment report. And it's important to note there is a small I spoke, I think, a couple of episodes about BNG, biodiversity net gain. If you are commissioning a preliminary ecological assessment, then the baseline BNG data will be collected as part of that. So they will draw a map and condition score the habitats as well, because that will be used for not only the PEA, but it will be used in the future as well. So an important thing to clarify with your chosen ecologist is, are they collecting the site data to something called UK HAB, or are they collecting the data to something called JNCC Phase 1? It's important that they collect it to UK HAB, because if at a later date it turns out you do need BNG, then the data is there ready to support that, and you're not going to have to pay for further assessment. So check that one. What else? The PEA will basically, the output report will flag what, if any, further surveys that you need. So if the property has bat potential, it may be you need further bat surveys. If you've got a water body within 250 metres that's linked to the site, it may be that you need eDNA surveys for great crested newts. And all of this is about building an evidence base to submit to the local authority to say, this is what we have got, this is what we haven't got, and this is how they'll be protected through the development phase. It will also, this document is an important foundational step, because it's going to stop you paying for surveys that you don't need. So it may be that your architect, or maybe even the planning officer, says you need a bat survey, or you need this, or you need that. The preliminary ecological assessment will be provided to you by an organisation or an individual that is highly qualified and experienced, and they'll be able to help you navigate through the potential ecological constraints at your site. But before we go any further with that, it's time for Panic Line. You've got the questions, the planning system's a nightmare. We have got the answers. Welcome to the Planning Permission Panic Line. So we've got a couple of interesting ones here from an ecological perspective this week. And we've got one here from Alina in South End, which came through Instagram, I think. And it basically, she says, what happens if we ignore the ecology report and just crack on with the build? Well, those two things aren't really connected, Alina, because I'm guessing maybe you've received an ecology report, and perhaps the news that ecology report gave you is not what you wanted. Ultimately, that ecology report is going to have to go in and support your planning application. So we have had situations, and it does happen, where people get news, and we get that this is an embuggerance and it's not something that you want to pay for or engage with for the vast majority of people. So, we try and handhold you through the process to protect you and make sure your legal obligations are fulfilled. But we do have situations where we sometimes get an inquiry into our office, and it smells a bit suspicious. And what actually turns out is that they've had a previous report, they didn't like the results, and they've either cleansed the building, filled in the holes, repaired the tiles, removed any evidence, and they then try and get somebody else to do that report. I'm not in any way suggesting, Alina, that's what you're looking to do, but I would just say that if you get a report, it's important to understand those recommendations. They're often in the executive summary, and there'll be some tabulated form in there somewhere that says exactly what you need to do next to progress. A preliminary ecological assessment on its own is not always suitable to support a planning application if it recommends further surveys. So you can't just really ignore it. You're not going to get your planning permission unless you've ticked all the boxes. So I hope that helped a little bit with that. What have we got here? We've got Josh in Bath, and it doesn't say how that's come into us. It says we're in pre-app talks with the local planning authority, and the planner mentioned a habitat management plan. Is that another consultancy fee I need to budget for? This is my favourite thing in the world, is unpicking exactly what the local planning authority wants or means. I think I've talked about it in previous episodes, but it's worth mentioning again how the planning system works. So when you submit your application or you ask for advice, you are assigned a planning officer, and that planning officer is the gateway to the LPA, and that planning officer doesn't progress. They're like a gatekeeper. They will not progress your planning application until they believe they've got all the information they need to go to the consultees, and the consultees will be there'll be people from highways, people from ecology, people from trees, people from landscaping, all that kind of good stuff. And at the end of the day, it may be that the planning officer has a basic working knowledge of what potentially the ecologist will need, but how they've communicated that to you is by using terminology that isn't necessarily quite correct. So if they mentioned a habitat management plan, it may be that they're talking about biodiversity net gain. So that is a step that comes on planning consent. They will basically ask you or put a planning condition on for something called an HMMP, which is a habitat management and monitoring plan. And that basically says the areas that we've said that we are going to use on site to get our biodiversity net gain, this is how it's going to be managed and monitored over the 30-year period, basically. So that is possibly what he is indicating there, Josh, but I think you need to go back to them and get a little bit more information, because that is quite vague. So back to the episode. So what comes next after the preliminary ecological assessment? Well, basically, one or two things. There's going to be one or two outcomes. One, it's going to say that the project is going to have minimal effect on biodiversity, habitats and species. No further survey effort is required. Happy days. That PEA then becomes a document that you can submit to support your planning application to say, look, I've done everything I need to do from an ecological perspective and all is well. The second potential outcome is that the report recommends further surveys. That could be for bats, it could be for badgers, etc., etc. Some things require additional survey effort before planning consent, some things don't. So if the ecologist identified, for instance, nesting birds, and those bird nests were in a hedge that's going to be removed to facilitate development, it may be that that can be dealt with through something called Ecological clerk of works. So there would be checks done to make sure there's no birds nesting before the hedge is removed, or the hedge could be removed outside of the bird nesting season. So I'm oversimplifying that to make a point, but what will happen is there'll be lots of recommendations within the report. So you need to read through that, carefully understand it, ask clarifying questions to your ecological consultancy, and they should be able to handhold you through that. So really key is to get that PEA done early, a bit like the tree surveys, trees first not last. Get your PEA done early. You're almost certainly going to need it unless you're in a heavily built up area with just residential gardens around you. It's not an optional extra, it really is the starting point for all ecological effort at your site. Don't use it as the last checkbox, it determines kind of everything else. So before we get to the end of this episode, we have got one more feature, and that is you couldn't plan it. So here we go with that one. Hi folks, it's time for You Couldn't Plan It, the feature where me and my team have scoured the internet for stupid, silly and downright infuriating planning related facts. Let's go. So this one is tree related, and this is this one, when I say my team scoured the internet, this is properly scouring the internet, because this article is apparently in the New York Post. However, the New York Post very clearly shows a tree that is in a suburb of Sheffield. So go figure. Who knows what's going on with news sites these days? Can you trust any of it? Half of it's AI, isn't it? But anyway, this is absolutely brilliant. And it says, bizarre half-cut tree from neighbour dispute becomes an unlikely tourist attraction thanks to Google reviews. So this tree, and I'll get Kian to pop the link in the description, because this is worth looking at. This is an absolute masterpiece. I'm recording this on August the 5th. I think this episode is going to be going out right at the end of August, possibly the beginning of September, but we had some really high winds and storms in Scotland yesterday on the 4th of August, and this tree would have blown over. So basically, if you look at the image, it says, a tree chopped in half by an angry retired couple in a bitter boundary feud has since become an unlikely tourist attraction and even has Google reviews. The neighbour was left gutted in 2021 when Irene and Graham Lee sliced half the branches off their 16-foot fir tree that stood outside their home for 25 years. Now, just to manage expectations, because I know most of you aren't going to go and click the link and look at this, this is just a Leylandi cypress tree that was probably planted as a hedging plant. It's planted in a grass matrix outside a detached house in a typical suburban setting, and next door just has a block paving driveway, and this tree, the crown height of it looks to be about 2 to 2.5 meters. So I mean, this is not a big tree. And it says the drastic action came after a year-long dispute between Mr. Mystery and the Lees, both in their 70s, in the leafy Sheffield suburb of Waterthorpe. There's nothing like the Brits for fighting over 6 inches of land. And the article goes on to say, he said the couple were angered because birds had been nesting in there and damaging their driveway with droppings. I can understand that. 3 years on, locals say rubberneckers still visit the quiet cul-de-sac where houses sell for around $220,000 for a good look at the tree, which is still cut in half. It's even been tagged as a tourist attraction on Google Maps, and visitors have left reviews. You've got to post. You've got to post the link to the reviews. This is brilliant. One reviewer who left a 3-star rating wrote, interesting tree that was cut in half due to a feud between the two neighbours, stating the bloody obvious there. The story was also all over the news and was interesting to visit the location to see the news turn into real life, blah, 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 blah. Google Street View has not been updated since 10 years ago, so you can actually see the original tree before it was cut off. Somebody else has put, not worth driving a long distance for, but if you're nearby, it's worth paying a visit. Goodness me. I don't know what else to say about that. Anyway, I think in one of the earlier episodes we were talking about boundary disputes, and that graphically illustrates it. The tree's browned off on one side, and it's pretty horrendous. It made it onto Jeremy Vine's Channel 5 TV show in 2021 apparently. So neighbours distraught, tree surgeons hacked away, and very British, very funny. So back to the episode where we're just going to wrap this one up, folks, basically. So we've been talking about preliminary ecological assessments. As I say, get them done early. It's not an optional extra. It is the starting line for all things ecology when it comes to your planning application. Don't treat ecology as a checkbox. It's what determines everything else. So always happy to advise. There'll be links in the description if you want to reach out to us for some help, or you can go on the website and get some of our free books. So that's it from me this week, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for listening.